Hello and welcome to our tutorial. So in this tutorial we are going to try and create a simple sort of scene like this. So we have a 3D character, 3D animation, and we're going to try and place that 3D animation inside a 2D piece of video in Fusion. Now the video, we'll get to in a minute, is shot in a drone. But we'll have a very quick look at the 3D model. So the 3D model was made in Blender, and this is it here. We're going to use about 150 frames, so I think I've exported frame 1 to 150. So it's got a simple little walk animation. The character was made using cycles render, or kind of the nodes in Blender for cycles. It has it's Blender 2.79, so it uses the principal shader, and it has basically three maps. It's got a diffuse map, a spec map, and a normal map. So color, shininess, and bumps. So those three will have to go across into Fusion as well. Normally, if you're leaving Blender for, say, a piece of software like Unity, you would export an FBX file, or just bring in the blend file and let Unity convert it to an FBX, and it would bring in with it all the animation data. That won't work in Fusion, so we're going to have to export it as an Alembic file, which is not ideal because it means that we have to kind of reassemble those textures in Fusion, but also the files will be quite big, so it kind of saves a version of the mesh for every frame. So if you have a 50 or 60 meg blend file, it'll turn into 500 or 600 meg Alembic file, but we'll do our best with it. So what I did actually before I cancel it here, I went File, Export Alembic. There's my file there, Walk Fusion I called it. I didn't change any of the generic settings, and I hit Export. Okay, so let's jump into Fusion and set this up. So this is Fusion 9, and it's the studio version, so it's not the free version. And the reason I'm using the paid version, apart from you should use the paid version to support people making software, is because I want to use the camera tracker, and you cannot use the camera tracker it's not available in the free version. So here's my piece of video, and just from knowing this piece of video, it's somewhere around 820, maybe 800, let's say 860. That's where we're going to start. So I'm going to trim this to 860. So that's going to be my starting point for my video. And I think we said we're going to be 150 frames long. So that's, so my video is going to start there and going to end. Oh, it has a little turn at the end there, so we'll get rid of that. So we'll make this say 120 frames long, just to keep things nice and simple. Okay, and that's what we're going to put our video, our 3D object into. So before we go any further, let's do the tracking. So Control Space, and I'm going to type in cam for camera, and then camera tracker. Okay. Because this was selected, it automatically connects them. I'll throw the camera tracker up here so we can see what we're doing, and I want to preview the tracks. So these green dots are the number of points that will be tracked by the camera tracker. So the more we have, the more accurate a track we're going to get. So it says minimize or minimum feature separation. So I can slide this left and right. Slide to the right, I'll have fewer tracking points, and slide to the left, I'll get lots and lots and lots. But it will take an eternity to solve or to track. But I'll get a more accurate result. So if you have loads of time and lots of computing power, you can go do that. So I'm going to increase a little bit the number of points I'm going to track. Just say 0.03. That is not a magic number, it's just what I found works with this particular shot. And then we're going to work our way through these tabs here on the camera tracker. So I'm going to hit So I'm going to leave bidirectional tracking on, so it'll track it twice and get slightly better results, hopefully. So I'm going to hit auto track, and then we should be able to watch this track. Now, as it tracks, it'll add and subtract tracking markers as it goes. So it's kind of a dynamic tracker. And it didn't like tracking that, so it skipped the middle bit. So I'm going to actually change the number here of tracks, hit reset, and track it again. And I don't know why it fell there. It could be I'm doing a screen recording at the same time, so I might have run out of RAM, or I'm not sure. Maybe I can click on the console here, it will tell me, but I don't want to spend too long doing this because we've a good bit to get through and I don't want this tutorial to be too long. So we've tracked along. Now it's going to do a quick sort of track backwards. Now there are lots and lots of things that we can change here. So gutter size, for example, is the area around the edge of the frame. You know, if you make it bigger, it won't put tracking markers in those areas. But I'm just going to leave it all in with its default settings. Now I'm going to go to camera. This was shot on a DJI Spark, and just from reading stuff online, I know the focal length of that is about, for Fusion anyway, it wants to interpret that as 25 millimeters. There's lots of stuff here I can change about the camera, film gates and stuff, but I'm just going to leave it all in its sort of the generic settings, because I don't need to change them for this. I'm going to go to solve. So I've got 2,500 tracks, like tracking points. So I'm going to hit solve and let it try and work out a 3D visualization or a 3D point for each one of these tracking points. So I'm going to hit solve. Now while it's solving, let's try and explain what we're looking for. So up at the top of this, in the inspector here, it says average solve error. So when we're solving, we want the solve error to be below 1. If it's below 1, then that means that on average the tracking markers slip or move less than the width of a pixel during the track, which means they're stable. And if the value is above 1, and sometimes it's way above 1, you can get 5 or 10 or 100, that means that they're moving. And you know, you get that for, like, for example, in this image here, there are waves crashing onto the beach. Now they're quite small, but they're moving. So as it's tracking through the scene, objects in the scene are moving, or there's seagulls, or there's, you know, and those objects, as they move through the scene, will, you know, will make the result less accurate. So let's draw a box around all of this stuff on the water, because the water's moving, and I'm going to delete them. And actually, no, what I did there actually was, I'll explain what I did there in a minute. So I'm just going to select all of them and press backspace and try and get rid of them all. So you can see all the ones here that are red. Now, down here what we can do is I can say maximum solve error. So I can bring this down. I can say things that have a solve error above the number, say 1.8. So we're up here, we're at a solve error of 1.1. Anything with a solve error higher than 1.8, so let's say a seagull flying across the screen, delete them. So I'm going to do that now. And now I'm down to 1,000 tracks. So I'm going to hit solve again and see if we can, with the ones that are left, get a decent solve. Now it'll be quicker to solve this time, but the fewer trackers that we have, the less accurate our 3D representation will be. So you're sort of in a catch-22. So now we've got a solve error of 0.4, which is very good. And we have a decent number of tracking points, so we can go at that. Okay, so before we go to export, or before we export and make the 3D point cloud of all of these markers, what we're going to do is going to go to Scene Transform and click Unaligned. We're going to set up the area that we're going to place the 3D model in. So it's going to draw a box around all of this sort of area here, because that's where I'm going to place the model. And I'm going to say that this is, so it says XY ground plane. So none of these markers are on sort of like a vertical wall. They're all along a flat plane, which is, this is a good shot to do this in. It's not a rolling hill or something, which would be harder to track. So I'm going to hit Set from Selection. So it's going to know that those markers are in the place where the ground should be. And then I have to pick an origin. So I'm going to draw around this one here, and this is going to be my origin, my 0, 0, 0 in my 3D world. So I'm going to set that there. And then I need to set a scale. So I'm going to select over these two. And in terms of scale, these are probably about roughly a meter apart, maybe a bit less, maybe 0.8 of a meter. So I'm going to go Set from Selection. Needs two locators selected, so I thought I had two there. Oh, it's not liking those two. So let's pick two different ones. So let's say these two here. And it's guessing that they are 0.15, so about 15 centimeters apart. And that's not a bad guess. I'd say that's about how far apart they are. So I'm going to go with that and go OK. And I was very close to what it had anyway. So once we've set our scale, and we've set our ground plane, and we've set our origin, then we can hit Export. And we're done. So I'm going to go back to my flow here, and a whole bunch of extra nodes have been added. Now, so let's just move these in here and zoom in a bit. So this is my original video, and this is my camera tracker that we added in, and then Fusion has added these extra bits in. The most important one is this here. It's the merge, where everything is connected. So I'm going to drag and drop that in here. And what we'll see is we've got an image plane. So this is this selection of green dots here. These are all empties. These are all markers for the ground. And this is where we're going to place our 3D model. And we'll also see that there's a green line passing through the camera. As we scrub through our video, that is then the camera animating over these features that it has put the empties on and tracked. Cool. So all we need to do is place our 3D model squarely on top of these markers, and then it will appear on the beach, and the camera will track towards and over it, or in this example here, towards it. Now, do we need all the rest of these things? No. So there's a ground plane. We don't need that. So you can see it's disappeared. And we have a point cloud, which is all the dots. Now I'm going to leave them in for a minute. I will turn them off in a minute, because they'll get in the way. And this is my original video footage, and this is my camera tracker. So I'm going to put all this stuff over here. I'm going to draw a box around these guys, and I'm going to go Control Space and type in UN for underlay is what I want. I'm going to hit OK, and it'll just box them, so I can move them all together, and I can obviously go in and I can deal with them individually if I need to. So now I'm going to save this composition. So I'm going to go Save As. Our tracking's done. Now I've done this twice before this recording, so I'm going to call this Fusion 3D Blender. I say I've done twice before. I've done loads of times before, but twice before using these assets. So now I'm going to bring in the robot. So we're going to go File, Import Alembic, and this is it here, our Alembic scene. So it's about 400 meg. Even though it's 150 frames. My frame rate's 25 per second because I'm in Ireland. And then this is my robot. Now there's a piece of text in here that I'm going to just delete because it's the robot's actually from a little short film I made for March on Film, which is a lovely film festival here in Ireland. So I'm just going to delete that because I don't need it. I'm going to take this merge and merge it with the other merge, and there's my robot. Okay, so let's take the robot, that's the robot shape there, and move it into position. So now I go right click, view from the top, and we'll zoom out, and there's the robot there. Now I'm going to take this merge here, put it over, and I'm going to go right click and show me what the camera sees. And so at the moment, that is what the camera sees. And so what are we going to do? We are going to zoom out a little bit and zoom in. So let's take this robot and move it a bit more, yeah, right there. And then we will go to its controls and we will scale it back. Now it's very small, and we'll move it forward just a little bit. I'm going to look at this from the side, so I'm going to go from the left and zoom out and try and position this on the ground. So that looks like that's my ground plane there. So you can see this is not a perfect track here. Let's go to perspective mode. It's not 100% flat, which is probably, the beach is probably not 100% flat. So we're trying to find an average height to place this guy at. So again, we'll look at it from the side. Okay, we'll make this, there we go. So we can afford probably to make him a tiny bit smaller, just in terms of scale, and then we can bring him down a little bit to the beach level. Okay, so it would appear, just from looking at this, that these guys here are the sea and the waves, and hence they're up higher, and this line here is my ground plane for the beach. Okay. So he's sort of in place now, but he has, if we look at him shaded, he's just grey. So we need to go fix this guy and bring in his materials. Before we do that, we'll just see if the animation's in. So that's the animation there. So we'll fix him, see how good he is on the ground plane in a second, but just to test that the animations came in. So in order to bring in the materials, or the textures, I need a material. So I'm going to go Add Tool, 3D, Material, and Long. And I'm going to plug this into the robot shape, which is his mesh. Okay, and we'll just move this out of the way here. Now, I want to bring in, so I'm just going to hit loader. Actually, no, I'm going to cancel that. I'm going to go bring it in by hand. So then we need to add extra merges. So I'm going to go 3D, IO loader. And I'm going to bring in, where am I going? So I'm going to bring in my diffuse texture. So I'm going to right click and drag and drop that here to the material, and I'm going to say it's my diffuse color, because that's what it is. So now I've got my diffuse color on. I'm going to right click and go add IO loader, and I want to bring in my specular map, which is this one here. You can see it. And I'm going to right click and drag and drop that here and say it's my specular intensity map. And then the last one I want is the bump map. So I'm going to right click and go loader, and I'm going to bring in the normal map. And this, I can, if I attach this directly to here, there's no normal map option. So I'm going to go add tools, 3D texture, bump map. Oh, no, I'm not. So add tools, 3D texture, bump map. I'll put the bump map in here, and then this in here. It's kind of similar to how you'd set up the nodes in Blender. And then here I can change the height scale, which is basically how bumpy it's going to be. And I can also here with on the material itself change things like how the specularity is going to work, and just how bright or not bright it is. Okay, so my character is now on the beach. So I'm going to disconnect this point cloud here, so it's not kind of getting in the way of our view of things. So I'm just going to scrub through. So this is our character walking. And that looks pretty good. He looks like he's pretty solid in terms of his lock onto the beach. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear. We have crashed. Where are we? We are 21 minutes in. So before I hit close the program, we have our tracking done, and we have our background or our robot done. But we haven't got our output or our shadow done. So I was going to close this, and rather than starting again, I might load in Fusion 3D Blender. Let's see when the last time we saved that was. We'll try and open it up again. Fusion's normally quite stable in my experience, so it doesn't. It never crashes on me when I'm not doing a screen recording. So, so you can go File, Open. This is the one we're working on. Okay. Let's see how quickly we can rebuild what we had. So the Alembic scene. We just hit OK for everything. We moved it over here. We deleted the text shape. We put the merge in the merge. And we added a bump map. We added a Phong material. And we attached that there. And we put that to there. And then we brought in our 3 images. So 3 IO loader, which were a diffuse map, and a normal map, and a specularity map. We plugged the normal map into bump. We put the specularity map in here and the diffuse map in here. So let's go File, Save. Okay, and then we will look at what we've got up here, and then we repositioned the robot and rescaled it. So let's do that. There. We looked at it from the side. Placed it down here. And then we, with that selected, we changed, what did we change? We changed its scale. And we do that in here. After we changed its scale, we repositioned it. Okay. So let's save that. Look through the camera. Now he's still much bigger than he was, and he's not in the same position, so we'll move him across a little bit. And again, we'll save that, and we'll hit shaded. And there is our character walking in our scene. Okay, and then we disconnected the point cloud. Okay. We'll get rid of it. Yeah, so all good. So, in order to, so we'll select all these guys, and we'll go add an underlay. Now you can rename these underlays. They're just handy to have in terms of moving stuff around. So next we're going to just set up our output. So we're going to go 3D, render our 3D. No, we're not. There we go, render our 3D. We'll take the output of that and put it into the renderer, and then we want a saver. So saver, and we'll call it walk. And we actually, that's a critical error there. We need to call it walk.mov and make it a movie file. And we'll just check, yeah, it's H.264. Okay, we won't worry about those settings too much for now. However, having this here allows us to throw this up and see what it looks like as a finished render. So it kind of gives us a preview of the render. I'm going to change that to OpenGL so it's a bit faster. And enable lighting, enable shadows. Okay. Now, talking of lighting and shadows, let's add in a shadow and a light. So I'm going to go Add Tool, 3D Light, Spotlight. And I'm going to add the spotlight into my merge here. And you can see we're already illuminated. So we'll drag the merge up in here. And we will have a look at what we're doing. Now, where is my spotlight? It is way over here. So I was going to view this from the top, and we'll move over our spotlight here. So if we look at the video, so I'm going to rotate this on Y. So if we look at the video, the sort of the major so I'm going to rotate this on X. Okay. I will click shaded. So right, and we'll save this. Anyway, I'm not finishing my sentences. So the major sort of source of light is over here to the right hand side. Now that's not entirely true. There's lots of ambient light, etc., which we'll fix in a minute. But that's the major source of light. So we have all sorts of. So we have the cone angle, and we have a whole bunch of things about shadows and shadow maps. So we'll kind of get to them in a minute. So we're going to add in a plane. So I'm going to zoom in here a little bit on my nodes. And I'm going to add a 3D shape 3D. No, I'm not. There we go. I'm going to add that into the merge. So this is my my plane. I'm going to go to its transform properties, and I'm going to rotate it on the x-axis, so we'll say -90. And we want this to, so I'm going to go from the left. So we want this to align with our ground plane so we can catch our shadow. So let's reconnect our point cloud, move this up, and then I'm going to rotate it on X. So, whoops, so that it's roughly in the right position. Yeah, about there. We'll lift it up a little bit, and then we'll change its scale. And we can move it on its own y-axis to there. Excellent. So, and yeah, so this is all good. So now we have receive shadows, and it's a shadow caster, so we don't need it to cast shadows. We'll leave it on for now. We don't need to cast shadows. We need it to be visible, and in its blend mode we want it to use luminosity, so brightness and darkness, but beyond that we want to give it a material so we can control how it looks a little bit. So I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to right click and go add tool, 3D, texture, not texture, material, and font, as we did before. Drag and drop that into my shape, and then I'm going to have a look at its settings here. So I'm going to change its opacity so we can see what's going on underneath, and what we want to see is a shadow basically from this lamp, from this spotlight. So I'm just going to open that up a little bit. Open that up. And alright, we'll move it back. Okay. So we can start to see the shadow of the character kind of going across the beach here. And we can increase the shadow map size and density. And you can see that the effect that that will have on the shadow to make it darker and more dense. And the shadow map size is how much detail we'll get in it. So we could have a very simple shadow map, or we can have more detail in it. So it's going to save this, and as we're walking through, you can see that the shadow of the character is, animated, because it's, a real-time generation. You can see that the shadow doesn't quite touch the feet of the character, so let's go in and look at this ground plane, and you can see there's a gap between the feet of the character and the plane. So if we lift that up here, we should be able to make them connect a little bit more realistically. And then, if realistically is the right word in this scenario, then what we also need is we need another light. So I'm going to go add 3D lights, ambient light. I'm going to connect the ambient light into the merge, and it has made a dramatic difference, and we'll change the intensity of that ambient light to about there. Okay. Now, I'm going to go back to my now I was going to save this. Now this is not an ideal way or a perfect way to do this. I'm sure there'll be lots of people going, what's he doing? He's put a plane on the ground and it's, you know, it's dark up here and it's not dark down there, and he's done terrible things. So this is not an ideal scenario in terms of creating a shadow. And you can see actually here the cutoff point from my plane and sort of the terrible things it's doing to my scene. But there is no shadow catcher in Fusion, so it is actually quite difficult to, or at least I haven't come across a really simple and slick way of getting a shadow in. I know there's a way of doing it where you do what I'm doing here, send it through another renderer, and then only take out the dark component and merge it back in. But I need to go figure out properly how to do that. But this for now is not a bad solution. Now I'm going to make the plane bigger so it covers all of this, so I don't get this kind of cut-off point. So I'll go back to my 3D shape, and we'll have a look here at its scale. So we'll type in, say, 10, and then we will shift it forward so that we have sort of the edge of the sea, sort of a natural sort of cut-off point for it, and then we don't get that nasty line here. Now we do get, you know, a drop in saturation. Now I can do other things. I could, instead of just using a huge blank plane, I could put a smaller plane around the character. Yeah, there's a whole ton of stuff I could do here, but this kind of gives you an idea of how to take a 3D model out of Blender, how to export that model and bring it into Fusion, and how to integrate it with a piece of 2D video, and it also gives you plenty of time to think of how you would improve upon that. So this is just a simple setup here. And you can see that in the flow here we have now 3 basic components. We've got the original background video footage and the tracker that went on it. We have this import here from the Alembic file from Blender, and the textures that we brought into the Phong material. And then we have our ground plane that we've used to catch a shadow from the spotlight that we've placed behind the character, and then ambient light. And then we've got our export through our renderer here. Now, let's see if we can actually render out a file. And how long that takes. So this is where it's going to go. It's going to go to, let's send it to my desktop for convenience. And it's going to be called walk.mov. So let's hit render, start render, and off she goes. I have a whole bunch of things I haven't tweaked. I haven't changed the normal map in the character to make it, to increase the amount of bumps, etc. on the surface of all sorts of things I haven't done. There's lots of more materials to bring in to make his eyes glow, and just as a basic sort of a starting point to show sort of basic technique, it's not a bad example. And if you do have a good link to how to do this shadow without me destroying my image with a ground plane, please send me a link, and I would be a happy recipient. Cool. So we'll save this, and we'll exit out, and this is our movie file here, which should not surprise us. So far from perfect, and far from seamlessly integrated into the video. But as a starting point, there's a couple of so he doesn't look like he's slipping. To my eye, anyway, he looks fairly locked in. The shadows not terribly convincing, as are his materials and all of the settings that go with that. So there's a whole bunch of things to change the lighting, but as a starting point, it is not bad. Okay, so we'll leave it there for now.